by this point, I think we should be streaming everywhere. So, hello everyone. I am HP Holo. I write things, and very often I talk with other people who write things. And today I am going to be chatting with Rob Howell, who has written a whole bunch of stuff and is re-releasing something coming up soon. So, Rob, I'm going to have you introduce yourself and tell us about your book.
Thank you. First, thanks for having me, and thanks for being so cheerful. You are quite the cheerful host. That was a pretty awesome intro there
I
from
got
my
lots of
point of view.
coffee in me,
Yeah.
even at this hour.
My name's Rob Howell. I write fantasy and science fiction and historical fiction, and I was a historian. I'll write pretty much anything as long as it seems like fun. And now that it's my job, I sort of have to worry about whether it pays or not too. So there is that. Uh, I am based out of Anthony, Kansas, where I'm soon to be opening up a bookshop.
Oh,
I
cool.
also have I also run the fantasy imprint at Chris Kennedy Publishing. That's New Mythology Press. And then let's see. Oh, I have a Patreon where I write Anglo-Saxon poems that are riddles. What else
Oh,
do I do? Oh, I pet cats and feed my wife and do all sorts of things like that. So that's about me.
fascinating. And I have some questions about Old English poetry and whatnot coming up soon. But first, I want to talk about A Lake Most Deep because it's an interesting book because it was in fact your first book, wasn't it?
It
Yeah,
was.
and so now you're re-releasing it. So my first question about it, first of all, what's it about for the readers who are just joining us and haven't heard of it before?
Well, one of my reviewers said, first reviewers way back when said it was like Raymond Chandler in a Tolkien universe, which I was pretty comfortable with.
Uh huh. That's
And
a
then,
strange
and
combination of things. I like it.
yeah, well, what happened was is that it was my first novel, right? So I
Mm.
started writing, and I got about 30,000 words in, and it turned out, see, I'd intended to write an epic fantasy, but I had been writing or rereading rather Chandler and Robert V. Parker's Spencer series, which I do periodically anyway because I love them. And I realized I was basically writing a Spencer novel in this medieval fantasy Balkans where I did an archaeological dig once, and I thought, what the heck, let's do Balkans. Nobody ever does the Balkans for a theme for fantasy, so I did that, and I realized that this mixture of Spencer in this would be a lot of fun, so I wrote it, and then I wrote two others. But that was a long time ago, and shockingly enough, after over a million published words and several million now edited words, I'm a better writer than I was then. And
Yes.
so I have great. I want to start this off by giving a great shout out to Chris Kennedy, who is letting me republish it through New Mythology, because I'm so pleased that I'm getting to turn what I thought was a cool story with great characters, and I love the setting, and I always have from the beginning. But my writing then, if you're a writer, you look back at stuff that you written a few
Oh
years
yeah.
ago, and it's like, ooh, and because you've gotten better, and
Yeah.
so that's
I have
really
stuff that I released last year that I wish I can go back and change. So I totally get that. It's like I frequently reread my own stuff just to get continuity back in my head and whatnot. And
absolutely, absolutely.
sometimes I come across paragraphs that are just like, I really wish I'd worded that differently.
The efficiency that I write now compared to what I wrote. Dave Butler taught a class at 20 books to 50K last year about writing efficiency, and he
Mhm.
hammered on some things that I had started to develop theories along my own way, but he had it so well codified that it was really easy for me to incorporate.
Mhm.
Uh, Dave Butler is incredibly sharp. If you ever have a chance to meet him and talk to him
Oh
about
yeah,
writing
he's cool.
philosophy. So I had started already in incorporating those things, and then as I went through A Lake Most Deep, the edits just kept flowing, and I went from 106,000 words to 84, and then
Oh.
added four more thousand of clarifications, a new opening chapter. The opening bit was really slow, and I did a lot of clarifying and updating mostly. Um, some people had said there's a plot hole here or whatever.
Mhm.
But I still ended up about 16,000 words after adding 4,000 new words, about 16,000 total less than I had started with. And it's all efficiency stuff. It's
Mhm.
things that, he got up, walked across the room, took to the door, opened the door, and then went out, where you could just say he went out, right?
Yeah.
Like none of that stuff matters in this particular instance.
Yeah, and
And
it's the kind of thing where when you're a new writer, you think those kinds of miscellaneous details are significant. It's like I remember when I first started writing, it was very important to me to let the reader know the exact process a character was taking to do this very mundane thing. And now these days, I'm just like, nope, the reader's going to get distracted. We're going to cut that. They went to a place. That's yeah.
I think that's generally speaking the way readers want it, or at least that's the way I
Mhm.
want it. I don't want to know all the intermediate steps unless they
Yeah.
matter.
Yeah. Unless they're
And
somehow significant. Yeah.
yeah, and it's the same philosophy as imperfect tense, or there's another term for it. I learned it I learned the verb tense in Latin, and they call it imperfect. And basically, it's the past continuous. I think is the other way they teach it. And it's that idea that it's was doing something, I was doing something, and it's
Mhm.
because you're in the middle of it. And a lot of times you write it because that's what the character is doing.
Mhm.
But in fact, if you go to simple past, you can use that instead, and it's faster for the reader, and
Mhm.
you don't lose anything. And the only time you use the imperfect is when it matters. So anyway, sorry, I get a little bit geeky about grammar these days.
You're talking to the right person. When I was in college, I took 2 different English grammar classes at the same time because I wanted to. So you were amongst friends here.
Well, here's the ironic thing about grammar for me. I really didn't learn English grammar. I mean, other than just sort of the instinctive learning of a guy who read a lot,
Mhm.
I really didn't learn it until I took Latin. Because, of course, in Latin, since every word has a slightly different ending for what it's doing in a sentence, suddenly you have to really pay attention to what the word is doing, and where it's where the grammar actually is structured. And
Mhm.
for example, passive voice, I heard it all the time. Don't ever use passive voice. Well, okay, what is passive voice? Like, what's the definition? And I didn't know until I went to took Latin, and there it's very explicit, and that definition
Mhm.
is still the same in English. It's just we don't teach it the same way.
Mhm.
So
I really got into grammar not necessarily because I was interested in English, but because I was interested in linguistics in general. I can trace a lot of my writing habits to significant movies that came out when I was writing. And I want to say Atlantis the Lost Empire came out and hit a lot of points that I really liked, but I thought it was really cool that the main character was a linguist. And soon after that, Lord of the Rings, the films came out, and I really started getting into the languages that Tolkien constructed for it, and was just a complete language nerd. And because of that, and I don't create fictional languages nearly as much as I used to. I want to get back into it, but I just became absolutely fascinated with the structure of different languages, and how they can affect storytelling to a certain extent too, depending upon how you use them in your stories. And so it was just I like grammar. I like languages. It's so fun.
me too. I'm right there with you. One of my favorite movies is 13th Warrior, and there's a lot of reasons why I love 13th Warrior. But one of my geeky reasons is when they're doing the scene early in the movie where Herger is talking in Latin to Omar Sharif's character, who I never remember his name, but they're actually speaking Latin, and more specifically, they're speaking a more medieval version of Latin than the
Ooh.
Ciceronian Latin that you get, the classical Latin that you get taught in most Latin classes.
Mhm.
So whoever was in charge of their Latin really did a good job looking at the language there. It was truly amazing.
That's a cool detail. I don't know anything about Latin except that it's like used in fiction to summon demons a lot. And that's the extent of my knowledge about the Latin language. It's just one of those languages. Like, I never took a Latin class. It was never in my Southern public school. And so it's one of my blind spots in language.
Well, I never took it either until I became a medievalist, and I had to.
Mm,
I had
yeah.
to when I was doing medieval studies. I had to take Latin. My focus was on Anglo-Saxon England in the
Mhm,
10th century, so I had to learn Old English. And then there's a lot of research done in both French and German, so I had to
mhm,
learn that to be able to read. And along the way, I picked up a little bit of Norse because some of the documentation is in Norse. And then
mhm.
there are a few Welsh phrases I have studied and learned along the way for some cross border stuff. So it's really weird how scattershot it is for Welsh and Norse. But yeah, it's just once you get into languages, it's hard to get out. They're totally a
Mhm.
drug,
Well, it
and so
really
much of a
yeah.
drug that my language of magic or my language of the history of this universe is Proto-Indo-European.
Ooh.
It's based on Proto-Indo-European roots to create because it's more fun for me, honestly.
That actually leads me into one of my questions. How does the magic system in this setting work, and how did you go about designing it?
Well, there's several steps involved in this, but a lot of it is that I wanted the magic system to be individual to the wizard so that
Mhm.
every wizard has certain ways that certain things that they can do um, and that there needed to be sort of the D&D equivalent of druids can do certain things and clerics and wizards and bards and all these different kinds of things can do certain things, but I wanted it even more narrow. So I just sort of went about looking up your standard words, and then your words for magic users like enchanter, and then I started building around the concept of five basic types of magic. One that involves life and living things and also dead things.
Hmm.
Um, one that involves symbols, such as runes or songs. One that involves emotions. One that involves the elemental side of things, and then one that involves, and this is the one I had to put in there, one that involves history. Basically, the more you know of history, the better
Ah,
you can cast the spells, right?
that is
And
cool.
and basically, it's creating butterfly effects that shapes future history. It can do amazing things, but it can't do them fast.
Ah, okay. About how long does it take the history-based magic to work in the setting?
It depends on what you're trying to do.
So
If you're
the bigger the task, the longer it takes, kind of thing.
Yeah, I've got actually an entire mystery built around that to a certain extent, and it took 15 years. In the setting, it took about 15 years for the character to do the things that he wanted to do. Other spells and spellcasters have lasted centuries, in fact,
Ah,
because it's sort of it's sort of a cross between Gandalf, who doesn't cast very many spells, but is always at the right place, doing the exact right thing at the exact right time.
that's a form of
And
magic in and of itself.
yeah, which is magic, which is sort of his magic, is to be at the right place. And
Mhm.
then also, I really love the Foundation books by Isaac Asimov, and so it's sort of a combination of Gandalf and then Harry Seldon's psychohistory as a predictive thing, and then you toss in the butterfly effect concept, and you've got the root of
Yeah.
this entire side of magic. It's very
Yeah.
tricky to play with as a writer. Overall, I wanted a magic system that made every character, every spellcaster, somewhat unique.
Mhm.
That the magic system um, gave the characters constraints so that they weren't couldn't just, well, I'm going to pop off this new spell that I've never been able to do before, but what the heck, I need it to get me out of this uh, you fight or whatever.
Mhm.
I hate that. I want characters to have to struggle with it, and so I basically
Right,
wanted to
yeah.
give the characters a hammer. They have a hammer, and every problem that they face, no matter how good a or bad a hammer might be to solve that problem, that's the one tool in their toolbox. How do they use it to get out of
Mhm.
the thing that they've got? And then I also wanted it to be somewhat flexible in that while I love D&D and while I want to do a Pathfinder campaign, I'm going to probably start one with some buddies set in this universe. I don't I don't want the Vancian spell structure. I wanted something that where I could describe them sort of creating the magic on the fly, as it were.
Mhm.
And it's more sort of the sorcerer concept from Pathfinder and D&D, as opposed to the wizard concept. But that just seemed more fun to write.
Yeah. Now I forget, is the main character a magic user in this setting, or not in this setting, in this series? It's Edward, right? Edward.
In this first series, no, he's not. He is a warrior who happened to be trained by a very knowledgeable sage and magic user. So he has some concept of how it all works, but he doesn't have that skill himself.
Mhm.
He happens to be a thane who is disgraced and no longer can live where he grew up. He has to go leave his family, um, and go find his way in the world. And he keeps trying to find a home and keeps finding wars or murders or
Yeah.
mayhem or bad guys, because that's what you do to characters, right?
Oh yeah, I remember reading through the blurb, not the blurb, the summary for this book before when I was preparing my notes, and I was like, this character has a tough life, which is going to be really fun for me as a reader, but sad for him.
It is. And here's my historian coming through. I actually created that character based on an incident in Bede's Ecclesiastical History of England. There's a scene in there in Bede's history where a thane of Northumbria gets hit in the head and knocked unconscious,
Mm-hmm.
and all of his king and all of his fellow thanes, all of them are dead except for him, and he was just knocked unconscious. And he has got to try and struggle to figure out what his life is going to be afterwards. And I twisted it a little bit to fit the setting, but it's that I've always been fascinated by Emma. Emma is the guy in Bede. I've always been fascinated by the challenges he's going to have to face for the rest of his life.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. Speaking of which, that actually leads me into another of my questions. You've spoken about some of the authors and novels that that this one can be compared to. What are some of the other fictional influences or historical influences on A Lake Most Deep?
Well, Tolkien, obviously.
Oh yeah.
That's where a lot of it starts for me. Guy Gabriel Kay. One of the things he did was he basically took the world and then just added magic to it and then changed the names. And honestly, I wanted to use real world cultures, and I debated early on, could I use real world cultures? And then I was like, well, Kay does it.
Mm-hmm.
And if he can do it, I mean, he's better than me, but I can still do it. And so, and Tolkien did it, of course, with like Rohan. Let's see here. Dick Francis is one of the best tension builders of any writer out there. If you haven't read Dick Francis's mysteries, they are amazingly well paced.
Mm-hmm.
Robert B. Parker's Spencer series is really good with dialogue.
I'm
David
fascinated by all the mystery influences.
I grew up reading mysteries and science fiction and fantasy. Sort of just, I've read probably more mystery and science fiction than I ever did of fantasy.
Uh-huh.
My dad was not a fantasy fan, and so a lot of my earliest influences were what was on his shelf. So it was Asimov and Heinlein and Hornblower and C.S. Forster with the Hornblower series, and
Oh, I love C.S. Forster.
and then all those mysteries. So all the Mac Bolan stuff and Donald Hamilton and John D. MacDonald and of course Raymond Chandler. So yeah, those were all huge influences. And then when I got older and started, hey, I got to push away from my dad some. My push was to get into fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And so David Eddings is another one. I think any writer who wants to write fantasy should read David Eddings, if only to understand how you can use tropes in a positive sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because so good at using, I mean, everything in those stories is tropes. It's nothing but tropes. And yet you still like the characters. You still want to root for them. So all the things about never using tropes, well, he did it and did it well. how can we learn how to use them? Because there's, for all the things that we want to say about tropes get boring, there's still another tool in our toolbox to use.
Oh yeah, I have mixed opinions on tropes because I think if wielded lazily, they're bad. But that's true of anything that's wielded lazily. But the thing is, tropes exist because readers like to see them.
Absolutely.
And I am very much the kind of writer who would like to give my readers what they want to see so they continue to buy my books. So not necessarily regurgitate formulaic stories and formulaic characters, but aiming to satisfy the reader. And,
well, absolutely, and there, but some of that is that you do want to. I'm not. You're right. It's a balance, and that's the challenge here, is because readers want a spice that changes up. At least I do, and I think this is true of many readers. Mm-hmm. They want to see a dish that they like, but they like to see it spiced up. You go to how many places have like 18 different kind of macaroni and cheeses, and we'll make it up. Make up whatever you want, and it's just macaroni and cheese, right? Like, how simple is that? But you can have it with Gouda, or you can have it with ham or whatever, and that's really cool. The trope here is still your macaroni and cheese, but blending it with something else to make it better, I think is really important. Not using it lazily.
Yeah, one way I've come up with a phrasing that, that I've just discovered over my years of writing is, a lot of readers say they want to read a book that is just completely original. What they mean, in fact, is they want to see something familiar with a slightly different and original facade on it. And that was a really important thing for me to learn as a writer, because the thing is, truly original stuff often bombs because it's not familiar enough for people to want to pick it up. And so it's again about balance. You've got to find that balance between familiar stuff to attract the reader and new stuff to make them go, "Ooh, I want more of this."
I totally agree. And one of the things that we forget about Shakespeare often enough is that nearly everything that Shakespeare wrote came from a pre-existing source. Romeo and Juliet goes at least all the way back to, there's a classical Roman or Greek a play that has essentially the same theme. There's actually something like it in the Old English corpus too, although it's a little bit grimmer, because it ends with one family burning the other family in a longhouse, like you do. So all and if Shakespeare was doing it wrong, I want to do it wrong like him, because people love
exactly
it, and still do, right?
Yeah. All right. Now, there were more books in this series, right? You had 2 others, I think, that were released after that. Are these also being re-released?
Yeah. The Eyes of Vidal is book 2, and it comes out on August 29th. Where Now the Writer comes out on October 3rd, every 5 weeks. And then it'd be November 6th or something like that. I am aiming to finish Farewell, My Ugly. There's my Raymond Chandler nod.
That's a great title.
It is. Farewell, My Ugly, finishing that and having that to be the 4th book. And then after that, I plan to have a collection of the short stories and some in-world, historical documents, and some stuff like that, as sort of a break. And then I have 4 more novels that are epic fantasy, a completely different thread, but 4 more novels that are epic fantasy that I will put those out and aim to have a 5th, and maybe a 5th right in a row. So my goal is to have 10 straight 5 weeks. So the next 50 weeks have Fire Hall sagas come out that's been updated, and 2 full new novels, plus a new collection of stuff, along with the better. I mean, look at the cover that J. Caleb Clark did for my.
Yeah, that is a fantastic cover.
It is, and the art, the map, which I meant to should have done a release on it. I should do the release after we're come out to my Facebook after we're done here, and I'll release the map, show the new map of the city. Sean Stallings, who is Mark Stallings' brother, does great maps. He did a bunch of maps for the Eldris Legacy, still does. and they are just fantastic maps. He's an incredible artist, and he just pops it out like nothing. And I'm like, I couldn't do this in a million years. And he's just like, boop. I'm like,
People who can draw maps, like that's just it seems like it's an entirely separate artistic skill set. Like I can draw decently, like character designs and miscellaneous stuff like that, but if I try to draw a map, I can never get past the incoherent scribble phase. So like it's a unique skill set. You have to be able to take all this information and make it easily and quickly readable and pretty to look at the same time. And I don't have that skill.
I don't either. I will freely admit that the art from Order of the Stick, which is a fantastic webcomic if you don't know it, but the art from Order of the Stick is light years beyond my artistic capabilities. And if you don't know, the reason it's called Order of the Stick is because they're stick figures, that's all he can do.
And you know something though, it can be challenging to even draw an evocative stick figure. Like some of my favorite recent or semi-recent art has been from artists who their art is very, very sketchy, very, very just free, but it somehow manages to capture a really specific emotion so well. And it's just a few little wobbly lines. And it's amazing to me that a person can capture that much feeling in just a few scribbles.
You know, it's there's a line from the Belisarius series. If you haven't read the Belisarius series by Eric Flint and David Drake, you should. But one of my favorite characters in there, and this one has heavily influenced my writing, to be honest. It's another one I hadn't got to from that list earlier. But one of my favorite characters there is Ragunath Rao. And Ragunath routinely says, only the soul matters. So he's talking about that for people, but I think it's true of art and writing, and artists that can get to the soul of a topic with 3 strokes, sort of that Japanese minimalist thing that they really aim for. I think that's amazing. It's not something I can do as an artist, but it is something I am trying to do more and more with writing, is to get to the soul of what's important. It cut out all the rest, like we were talking about earlier, about you don't need to go through all the steps to opening the door and going out. You just need to say going out, because the soul of that entire sequence is going out.
Yeah.
So.
Cool. All right, let me see. Go back to my questions here. I was curious, how long did it take you to actually produce the refinished novel overall, going from when you started editing to packaging it up? And what was the process like? Because you've spoken a little bit about that, but.
Well, I would say, okay. First of all, it's a little hard for me to judge that for one thing only, and that is because I moved. My wife and I moved. We closed on the house in Anthony on April 11th and closed on the house in Olathe on July 11th. That was 3 very hectic months, and we are not at all unpacked yet. And we have to have this, we're aiming to have the stores open by October 11th for the symmetry of it. Right. And so obviously that takes away from my writing. But it took me about a month, not as my only project, but as one of my projects, a month of editing. Like I do a pass where I edit, and then I send it to my phone and I do what bed it. I lie in bed, or I sit on the couch and I read it off my phone. And for whatever reason, looking at it that way sharpens my eyes, and I catch a ton of mistakes. And then I incorporate those changes. I would say that part took about a month. And then it's the normal book procedure, because once we have a manuscript in hand that is a full draft, it takes about 2 to 3 months for us to do everything. Now that's not exclusive, of course. I've got a variety of books I'm working on in various different stages from the publisher side of things. But obviously there's the getting the art, and again, I'm lucky to have J.K. Clark doing the work. He's amazing. We have a great editing staff at New Mythology Press. I generally speaking go through Tiffany Reynolds. but Beth Agaju, Maya Cleve, Jonathan Miller have all done great work, and then we have a tremendous proofreader in Zach Ritz. And for those, you're just giving them whatever time they need, of course, because that's their schedule, and it's not surprising that Chris is using them and other people are using them because they're really good at that.
Oh yeah, yeah.
What they're doing. So, a lot of it is the whole publishing thing is just the all right, it's done, it's ready to go. Now it goes to the next step, and we wait until that step finishes.
Mm-hmm. Actually, just realized I might have an error in my marquee. Is the book already out, or does it come out next week?
Comes out Tuesday.
Okay, I'm going to change my little marquee here for a second. I just realized that. Let's see here. Edit.
No worries. My birthday was last weekend, and I had, all sorts of. Dang it! I've got a fly that decided he wants to be involved in this show. So that you see me swiping in front of my face, it's because there's a fly. And I was like, dang it. There's so many people who were gracious enough to repost or do whatever. I wish I had been smart enough to get it published a week ago, but I wasn't.
There is a lot to be said for author friends who are willing to share your stuff, because it's just like, it's just such a huge community, and we all want each other to succeed. And I think, like, my most recent series has been my most successful, and for a lot of reasons, but I attribute a lot of it to the fact that it was really the first time I really had a bunch of other author friends sharing my stuff. And
now that's your Titan Mage series, right?
Oh yeah.
Now is that what you're going to do for the Paladins?
I'm still debating, but I think I will do a Titan Mage story for that one. And that's not due until end of the year, right?
Right, not to the end of the year. To talk about this, one of the things New Mythology does every year is we do an anthology of valorous stories. Because one of the things I love in fantasy are people standing up at the bridge and holding off, and Gandalf there against the Balrog. I love those scenes, and sometimes I think we lose that sort of heroism in today's market sometimes.
We really do.
That's what I want out of these anthologies, and this year's anthologies is settled around paladins. But interestingly enough, we look like we're going to have quite a bit of several romance authors or authors who are romance authors at that sort of their main line, contributing.
This is going to be a fun anthology.
Yeah. And I believe we'll have Glenn Cook back again. He's done some Black Company stories, which are such a treat. But anyway, I'm really excited that you're going to be a part of it, and
I'm totally pumped for it. I'm deciding what kind of story I want to tell, because it's just the characters in Titan Mage are to a certain extent very paladin-like in and of themselves. So there's a lot of potential stories I can tell, and it's just narrowing it down. So I'm really looking forward to delving into that and getting that written.
So I'm excited. Anyway, sorry. I digress. I often digress.
That's what we do on this show. All right, let's see here. I cannot read my own writing sometimes. Let's see here. How long ago did the original come out? The original Lake Most Deep?
April 30th, 2015. So almost 9 years, a little over 8 years ago. I started writing it in 2014. I was in a really bad place at the time. I couldn't get a job because I mentioned the academic side of things. Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't pursue that because I found the academic world not comfortable for me. Mm-hmm. But I had too much education, so I couldn't get a job. And my wife left me, and my mom had breast cancer, and I was going through a country song, and I started to write. Yeah. And then I went to LibertyCon and to learn about, because I heard it was a great con for learning about business, and oh my God, yes, it is.
LibertyCon is magic.
Yeah, it is. And
like anyone watching, if you want to work in sci-fi and fantasy novels, go to LibertyCon. It is amazing.
It is. And found my tribe, right? I mean, found my writing tribe there. I so many positive things have come out of going to that first one in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And I've only missed one since, other than the pandemic year, and that
Mm-hmm.
was last year. Um, the event that my wife and I were going to get married at got shifted on us, not by our choice, but by a mistake at the county of Clay County, Kansas,
Mm.
or Clay County, Missouri. And so it was either a choice of coming to LibertyCon or being at my own wedding.
Tough choice, but the wedding definitely takes priority.
I said that I told Brandy I wasn't going to make it. Brandy Hendren, who is the runner of
Mm-hmm.
LibertyCon, who's also amazing, that I couldn't make it and why. And she said, "Well, you could have the wedding at LibertyCon." Yeah, I already asked. The wife said no.
Oh
The proto-wife said
no!
no.
You
Well, and
wouldn't
to
have
be
actually
fair,
been the first to get married at LibertyCon too, because I'm pretty sure there's been at least one other one.
well,
Um,
Cedar Sanderson
yes, that's what I
uh,
was thinking of.
and Sanford Begley got married there 2015. I
I
think it
still
was.
have. She had a bouquet made of little cats and grenades, and after their ceremony, they were handing them out, and so I still have the little cat she gave me hanging out somewhere in my room. I've cleaned my room recently, which means I've misplaced and lost everything.
Yeah.
Otherwise, Cat would be here. But yeah,
Cats and grenades is a great way to describe Cedar Sanderson to begin
it
with.
really is.
I mean, she's a red-haired bombshell to begin with, and then she's sweet and talented and smart, and she's awesome.
Oh yeah, she really is. All right, let's see. My next question. Okay, I want to hear about the love of Old English poetry. Like, I know you're into medieval stuff, but where did the interest in Old English poetry specifically come from? Enough that you have a whole Patreon devoted to it. I want to hear about this.
Well, Tolkien is where it started, I suppose,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a series of lines from the Wanderer, the Old English poem "The Wanderer," that are used in Tolkien, in The Lord of the Rings, almost word for word. They are the lines where Theoden goes, "Where's the writer? Where are the Halljoys?"
Oh yes.
And in the movie, they're really well delivered while he's in Helm's Deep. In that,
The moment you said that quote, that's what popped into my head, the scene from the movie, because it
Yep.
is so well delivered.
Yep. And in the original, it's Wherequam Mago, Wherequam Wherequam Merg, Wherequam Mago, Wherequam Mathamufa, Where Sindem's. Gosh, I haven't recited it in a while, and I've butchered it, but it's this beautiful rhythm in the Old English with this alliterative style. And I like rhymes. Who doesn't? But I love the alliterative style even better. And so it just flows and it matches me. And I started writing it about 20 years ago. Started dabbling with writing some of it in modern English, but using the same structure, putting in a lot of kennings and all sorts of neat word plays and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And just kept doing it. And then I started writing riddles, and a couple of buddies said, they really love the riddles. And I said, what the heck? I'll put out the Patreon, and then I'll add snippets. So it's like every other week is a riddle, and then every other week is a snippet from whatever work in progress seems to be appropriate. Like last week was a Lake Most Deep, and next week will be a riddle, and then after that will be Lake Most Deep, and then so that's how that works.
Yeah, when I was in college, I had a professor he was a very good professor in general, but he was best when teaching like Anglo-Saxon Beowulf style stuff. And I remembered when I was in his class, I absolutely loved studying the sound devices and structures that were used from that era, to the point where I thought they were actually going to heavily influence my writing. And then immediately after that, I had another professor that was really good with Victorian literature. And that was around the time I got into steampunk. And that completely changed the trajectory of how I write. But I was looking at notes about your writing and your historical background, and was trying to think of all the things I liked about studying Beowulf in particular, and what with Kennings and whatnot, and it has completely fallen out of my brain, which really astonished me, because I just remember loving it so much. I'm really into I like studying poetic structures, not because I enjoy writing poetry, but because poetry forces you to write efficiently. And it's I feel like even if you're going to be writing prose, you need to look at poetry every now and then, because it shows you how to wield your words very deftly. And a lot of people don't actually realize this, but Edgar Allan Poe is one of my biggest influences, precisely because of the way he uses certain sound devices and rhyme schemes in.
Oh yes,
yeah.
I love Poe, and Poe is so good poetry. Really good poetry is far better when you speak it. And Poe is such good poetry in part because his stuff is so mellifluous, and
there is such a great rhythm to it. Yes. It is so fun to say.
Yes, and I actually started writing poetry before I wrote prose. A lot of it. So I started writing the Old English stuff, and then I'm part of the Society of Creative Anachronism, and along the way I started writing poetry in just about any poetic style that seemed to be interesting, like Catalan octosyllabic rhyming couplets, and when that's actually fairly common. The Irish use it too, and sonnets, and then there's kind of a loose style that the Mongols used because it was all oral, but and then there's Russian epic poetry is also built around that, and then of course you've got a lot of the Germanic styles, which right. So I've tried a bunch of these things because they're fun, right?
Yeah.
And then I started writing prose, and one of my first editor, Kelly Holgren is her name. She would routinely have to tell me, "Look, you're writing prose. Quit making this a 100,000 word poem." And yeah, that's probably fair.
Did it have a very specific rhythm when it was read? Is that?
Well, a lot of it was that I would write with that rhythm in mind, and I mentioned Raymond Chandler, and I love Raymond Chandler's ability to take something that is not necessarily the soul of the story, like we were talking about earlier, but it's so evocative that it sort of becomes the soul of the story. The one that I always go back to is the one where the winds coming down of the Santa Ana's change everything, and I'm butchering the quote, but it has this wonderful line of, every bar has a fight. Wives look at their knives and their husband's neck. Anything can happen. You can even get a full beer at a bar. And it's just this evocative, and it's the start. It's this long paragraph that really has nothing to do with the story, but the way it sets it is so vivid that you've got to read the rest of the book. And I'm not good enough to do that yet, but I love it. Right.
I love running into lines like that. Like there's several books there's a lot of books where sometimes you just run into a line and you have to stop reading for a moment just to appreciate it. And I run into that a lot with Christopher Rocchio's Empire of Silence. Like that's one, the first in the Sun Eater series. That's the latest.
Yeah, it's really good.
It's just like there are so many good turns of phrase in it, and it's a gorgeous book, and in addition to just a really entertaining one. But it's some of the best writing I've read in like 10 years. I love it.
I agree, and one of the things that he does really well, and it's one of the reasons like I read his stuff and try to get better myself, is he's got a ton of education too, and he's got a bunch of the same sort of, different specific influences, but the same sort of classical influences in his writing. And yet he includes them without them bogging the story down. And I will freely admit that the first version of A Lake Most Deep, my writing sort of got bogged down because I was putting too much of what I thought was cool, because that's what you do when you're a new writer.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Well, it's something you even do when you're an experienced writer to a certain extent too. Because when I have to go through and make my edits for even my recent novels, there's some stuff where I loved writing it, but when I look at it on my first read through, I'm like, yeah, that was me being indulgent. And sometimes it gets cut, and sometimes it doesn't. But,
Well, A, that's why we have editors,
yeah,
and B, I can't tell you how many times that I will find a phrase that is like, there's something wrong with this. I need to clarify it. I'll put a note on it, clarify, rephrase, whatever. And I get to it and I start trying to rephrase it. And I realize, if I just cut this entire sentence or paragraph
yep,
or phrase or whatever out, the story loses nothing
yep,
and gets better.
yeah.
So,
yeah. All right, let's see here. We're down to our last 10 minutes. This went by fast.
I can talk.
Oh, so can I. We're in good company. All right, let's see here. Okay, I'm curious. As productive as you are you a plotter or are you a pantser when you write?
I am more of a I am almost entirely a pantser as I started, but I'm becoming more and more of a plotter, but not a but it's sort of a pantsing style of plotting.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times what I'll do is I'll stick a note or a chapter heading, write this chapter. Because as I'm writing a story, I'm like, okay, I need to have this scene. So I'll skip down to in my draft, I have a bunch of blank chapters ready to go, and I'll just sort of write in the header of that chapter scene between so and so and so and so. Boom. And then go back to what I'm doing. Or I'll even do it the inline thing of sometimes I'll use the comment in Word feature, and sometimes I'll just do, if I'm really going good, I'll do the XX, write this scene, and then go back and search for all the XXs in my manuscript. It depends on how my brain is going at the time.
Yeah. I found that my brain or my writing developed similarly as I got more experienced. I was absolutely a pantser when I first started out. And it turned out that I was a very inefficient pantser. And some of that was due to the fact that I had undiagnosed OCD, and the OCD was completely hecking up my writing process. But once I got that diagnosed and figured out how it was influencing my writing, I began to ease toward doing very skeletal outlines, because I'm even though I'm not a pantser anymore, I still consider myself very much a discovery writer. Like, if I know exactly everything that's going to happen, it's writing the story is boring to me. So what I'll do is like very, very simple outlines where I just include basically what has to happen in the scene for the story to function. And then once I have an outline done, it's done. I'm not changing anything in the plot. Because I had a habit of going back and editing and re-editing. And if you continue to edit and re-edit as you're writing, when you're an inexperienced author, you're not going to get the book done. But basically, once I have my plot done, I let the characters and world building run freely as I write, as long as they service the plot. And that helps me quite a bit when I write. So it's not exactly what you do, but it's still that sort of, you have some structure, but you also have some freedom to be creative in it as well.
I am actually much more free than you are, to be honest.
Yeah.
My writing style, it can best be described as I am a DM, and I create characters and situations, and then I role play each character in turn. And sometimes that leads to completely new areas of thought that I'm not creative enough to come up with on my own, but I am when I'm acting or role playing, because I grew up in theater. Cool. I'm not in theater, but I did a lot of theater when I was younger, a lot of acting, and I did a lot of D&D. So role playing has always come fairly natural, and that's my basic process. Is I create characters and then I see what they want to do in these crappy situations that you put them in routinely. And so, for example, in A Lake Most Deep, it's not a huge spoiler, but about a third of the way through, he's talking to a character who becomes one of the most important characters in the series, who is a real bad guy. She is one of the crime lords in the city. She runs the drugs and prostitution and other such corruptive influences. And she is chaotic evil, like full chaotic evil. And the only reason he goes to visit her is because he has to He'd talked to the other main crime lord in the city, and so it seemed like, okay, he has to at least go talk to this person. Otherwise, the reader's going to go, well, why didn't he? And I get in the middle of this conversation, and all of a sudden my fingers start typing, and I don't realize what they're typing until afterwards. I look at it and wait. The person who the person who was kidnapped wasn't actually kidnapped. You killed her, you took her place, and you just walked out under cover of darkness, and we all thought it was a kidnapping. And it stopped being a whodunit and became a whydunit.
Yeah.
And that became a much stronger story. I had no anticipation that would ever come out. It just, my fingers typed it because I was role-playing that character.
That is really, really neat. What is your writing process? Like, is it pretty much you have an idea and then you do that the whole time? Or do you have a specific sort of writing ritual that you go through? Like you have to be in a specific place or specific time, or does it just kind of, I feel like writing, let's do it. There's some words.
I do better if I have a specific time. I do better for my first drafts if I use sprints. Unfortunately, with the move, and I'm still, like I say, not entirely done with the move, I've only written in Farewell My Ugly about 4,000 new words over the past 3 months, to be honest.
Moving will do that.
Yep. I did a bunch of editing along the way because editing can squeeze in a lot easier in terms of the time. And right, one of the things I focus on with my authors at New Mythology and also in general is understand the difference between excuses and reasons. An excuse you should avoid. That's something that you are trying to do to avoid writing. A reason is something you should not get down on yourself for. Moving is a reason. Getting married, your parents dying, your dog dying. These are all reasons. But avoid excuses. And part of the reason is because I went through a 3-week period in 2019. I'm going to Pennsic, which is a big SCA event next week, and it is a huge thing. This year, where they expect about 14,000 people, and it's been sort of one of my big things, and it culminates the summer. And that year I went to LibertyCon, and I went to a bunch of things. I spent more nights at Pennsic than I had at my house in the previous 3 months combined. And I was exhausted because at that time, during that time, I finished a novel. I wrote a short story from scratch. I got partway in another short story and another novel, and it was a hugely productive time. And I came back from Pennsic, and it's an exhausting trip. You tear down everything and you drive back, and now it's a 20-hour drive, and you get back, and shockingly, I couldn't write. Like I was tired. It's been a long summer. I couldn't write. I was exhausted. And so I didn't write, and I was like, well, I didn't get my 1,000 words. What kind of a jerk am I? And then the next day, I didn't get my 1,000 words again. What kind of a jerk? I mean, seriously. And suddenly I'm 5 days in and to no writing, and all I'm doing is sitting here telling myself I'm a real jerk, lazy butthead. And guess what? That doesn't help your writing either.
Yep.
And for 3 weeks, I basically was in the spiral of depression and fatigue, where I got nothing done. And it took 2 weeks after I started to realize it to dig myself out. And it was only because I wasn't smart enough to go, I had this big long stretch. I'm exhausted. That's a reason, not an excuse. I should give myself the grace to take a few days off. And so I encourage my writers, if they finish a novel, if they turn in a novel, take a day off, take a week off, get your head straight again. Mental health and mental structure is so important to every writer, I think. So,
and that's something I had to do myself with my last series, because with Titan Mage, I was releasing a book every 3 months, and for the last 3 books, writing them as I was releasing them. And it's really nice to know that I can release 5 books in a year, But oh man, by the time I finished book 5, I was very near burnout. Like I have certain over the years I've learned my sort of habits that I have that indicate when I'm about to hit a creative wall, and I was beginning to hit them in several points in that book. And I had a rule where once book 5 was out, I was taking a vacation, and I've been very bad at taking a vacation because I keep wanting to go write stuff, and it's absurd. It's like the moment I tell myself the moment I decide that I'm supposed to be resting is when my brain suddenly decides to get creative again. And it is the most absurd thing. But Jacob has come into my room and seen me like working on outlines and doing stuff. And he's like, "You're supposed to be playing video games. What are you doing?" And I'll be like, "I'm just doing a little bit." And then I go but I have to schedule my downtime because I'm so productivity oriented that I get depressed if I'm not doing something. Like it's something I legitimately have to watch out for because I can overwork myself very easily. It's one of those things where you enjoy what you do so much that you inadvertently burn yourself out, and it's something I have to watch out for. But yeah,
and I think a lot of writers need to do that. I mean, it's you only succeed at this as if you keep writing and you get better. It is as do a business as there is. You got to do it.
Yep.
But that being said, you've got to figure out what works for you. Like I can't put out that kind of productivity. I just can't. Not writing. My brain doesn't let me. I can. I have maxed out in a sequence 2,500 words a day for a stretch, for a goodly stretch, and then something happened to throw me off. But one of the things I can do is that I can write and then I can edit. Like for whatever reason, those two things are separate for me. And so one of the reasons I asked Chris to take over the fantasy side of things was I wanted to do more work, but I needed to do something that wasn't writing because it was not fitting with my brain. And that was just, one of those things that you learn as a writer. You've got to figure out what works for you. And every writer is different.
It really is.
There's one true way of writing, and whatever helps you get words on the page. I'll never match your content per year. I'll never put out how many. Let's see, was that 500,000 words on those Titan Mage?
Oh, it was. The first book was, I want to say, 75,000 words. The second was 80,000. The third was 120,000. And then the last two I want to say were between 90,000 and 110,000. So I mean they get chunky, and I'm actually changing up my writing process because I intend to release a book every 3 months at one point. But basically what I'm doing is writing and posting to Patreon until I get those books done, and then I'm gonna say release book 1 while I'm working on book 4 because that was a killer writing schedule. I'm not doing that again. So
for me, I want to settle now that we're getting close to moved, and now that I have a really good office space, and I'll basically be stuck at my computer. Like I've set it up so that I will be at my computer because I've got a bookstore right here that I've got to be watching the bookstore in case somebody comes in, and if nobody's here, well, I'm writing. So I've set it up so I'm chained to my desk, which is a good thing, obviously, from probably 10 to 6 every day. And I do. That's how I actually structure it at Penzic. And I find that to be really productive. But and hopefully I can get to what I really want to do. What I really want to do is be able to publish 20 books a year and write 2 full novels, plus then some short stories here and there. And to me, that's a good level of productivity that will keep me sane and also put me in a place where I'm continually getting new royalties and a new backstock and all that sort of thing. And I've got a ways to go to get that because the move didn't go smoothly. And we're setting up 2 stores and we're doing all these things. But
when is the bookstore set to open?
We're aiming for October 11th.
Nice.
And it'll be standard use books. I'll have new mythology and Chris Kennedy stuff here. Um, Maybe have some from. I'm hoping I can get from like Raconteur Press. I haven't talked to them about it, but it'd be nice because they got some neat stuff and they're close actually, Wichita Falls.
Oh, cool.
And then would like to get some of the Three Raven stuff and kind of give the. I'd kind of like to give some of these small indie publishers a chance to have a display, right? Because wouldn't it be cool that they can at least say, "Hey, we're Anthony, Kansas, middle of nowhere," but it's still neat to be able to say, "Well, we're in brick and mortar stores."
Yeah, it's still pretty cool. All right, well, we blew past 9 o'clock, so I'm going to start wrapping us up. But
I'm sorry, I always do. Like I never go under.
Well, we had some technical difficulties at the beginning too, so I think we might have actually ended up like right on an hour, so that actually worked out. But anyway, thank you for joining me. This was a lot of fun, and I guess I'll close this out by having you tell everyone where they can find your books, any other book news you have coming out, like if you're going to be at any cons or anything, and there we go.
Well, firehallsagas.com, and then robhowell.org, although pretty soon that's going to shift to go to firehallsagas.com. It's all going to be one website. You can find me on Twitter at Rodri2112. You can find me on Facebook. Look up Rodri2112 or Rob Howell. I am on MeWe, but I don't get on there very often. It just doesn't have the same level of interaction, unfortunately, which is, I suppose if I were there doing more things, I'd get more interaction. But but that's that and Discord are the places that I do Discord a lot. We have a new mythology Discord channel where we talk about fantasy stories in general. It's designed for people who are interested in fantasy. And yes, I post all sorts of new mythology news and stuff like that. But the discussions get pretty wide ranging on every kind of fantasy subgenres and writing styles and all sorts of things along those lines. It's pretty neat crew of people there. So the Discord channel, if you're interested in that, please just drop me a line and I'll send you an invite. Let's see here. Oh, I have a Patreon. The Patreon is patreon.com/Rodri2112, RHODRI2112. Rodri is my SCA name. So if you're going to be at Pennsic, you can look me up.
I was about to ask where that name came from.
Yep. I am Rodri of Callantyre in the SCA, and a lot of people know me there. I'll be at Pennsic starting next week, and I'll have a bookshop open there. The 2112, if you hadn't figured out, I might be a Rush fan. So there is that. Let's see. Gosh, I guess that's it. New Mythology Press, Chris Kennedy Publishing /new-mythology-press. And of course, Chris Kennedy Publishing has a ton of stuff if you're interested in science fiction and space opera of a lot of types, military science fiction. I have some stuff in the Four Horsemen universe, and I've written in some of the other universes there. I've got a story in the Hit World Valkyrie's anthology, which is going to be expanded upon by Marisa Wolf, who is a fun writer. Just got her first book with Bane, as a matter of fact. So exciting times for Marisa. And let's see here. I guess that's for conventions like, say, Pennsic, and then after that, I will be at 20 books. I had contemplated going to Pecan in Dallas, which was a lot of fun last year. But unfortunately, there's so much going on here. I don't want to take a trip and not get the bookstore open, right? And
yeah.
My wife needs help, and we've just got so much going on. So we'll see where I go. I think the next convention will be 20 books in Vegas. And then after that, we'll probably be, we'll be into 2024, and we'll see where I go there.
All right. Well, once again, I'm HP Holo, and this is Rob Howell, and both of us, thank you guys for watching. So
thanks very much.
See you next time. Bye.